Hello Animorphs fans and welcome back to the Animorphs universe. Today I'm counting down my top 10 villains from the Animorphs series. I compiled all the villains, put them on a big old list and narrowed them down to a top 10. One of the biggest problems with the Animorphs series was, I believe, the quality of the villains. So as much as this is a top 10 list, it's still not great. I think that's the one thing we were missing in Animorphs, is a truly great, consistent and oft-used villain. It's like the main thing we lacked. But regardless, let's do our countdown for top 10, then comment your suggestions for who your favourite is and what have you. Let's start from number 10, and for me it is William Roger Tenant, a one-off character from book 35. I liked that book for a start, even though it was a carbon copy of book 12. And in a way, William Roger Tenant is largely a copy of Jonathan Taylor Thomas from that book. But there's a bit more about William Roger Tenant, and apart from Chapman, he's the only controller we see whose Yeerk is overpowered briefly by the host. And what fascinates me about William Roger Tenant is it's this Yeerk who's obviously powerful and evil and mustache twirling. But the actual host, William Roger Tenant, is this peaceful, hippie-ish like man with this collection of birds, and he gives people advice. And there's that one point where he fights against that Yeerk, and it's just this interesting little bit. And not only is the character fun, but there's also a tragic side to it, so there's a bit more depth to this character than, say, someone like Jonathan Taylor Thomas, who the host, as we know, is probably also a dick, so there's that. But William Roger Tenant, as much as he was fun, was in what is largely considered a filler book and only appeared that one time and then disappeared. Where to, who knows. But I still liked him, and that's why he's ranked above quite a few other villains in this series. Who's number 9? Temrash 114. Temrash was Tom's Yeerk at the start of the series, and just so you're aware, the second Tom Yeerk isn't in my top 10 for reasons that I won't go into. Not part of the top 10, I'm not going to go into it. But Temrash was an interesting one. We only really got to experience him in book 6, even though he was present for the first 5 books. For those first 5, didn't really do anything special or meaningful, and we didn't even know the Yeerk's name. In book 6, he has that big talk with Jake, and we get to experience contact with the Yeerk for the first time, really. And he's an interesting character, cackling, mustache twirling evil, but we got to see some of his memories and we got to feel just that little bit of something from him, that little bit of personality in the Yeerks, whereas before all we really knew was Visifree, who cackled insanely, basically. So that was our first real experience of a Yeerk with, though limited, very limited, a little bit of nuance going on in there. And for that I do appreciate Temrash, and that book was very good, very meaningful, and Temrash fit right in. Apart from that, nothing too stand out, but I thought he was a pretty good character. Number 9. At number 8, and this may surprise a few of you, it may not surprise a few of you, the most prominent villain in the entire series is that boy, Esplin 9466, ranked number 8 on my list. I imagine he probably ranks higher on a lot of other people's lists. Lila, please stop scratching things. Esplin 9466 was overused, and though he had more depth to his character in the Chronicles books, by the time the main series came along and as we proceeded through that, there's a lot of speculation that Alaran, who's a very intelligent Andalite, was constantly battling with his Yeerk and sending Esplin 9466 somewhat insane, which caused him to become as incompetent and ruthless and impatient as he proved to be. That wasn't quite explained to us in a convenient way. You could say that Taylor was an example of that, who we met in book 33, who funnily enough is probably my least favourite villain, so is certainly not appearing on this list. That something similar must have happened to Espen 9466, where the constant battle with his host sent him into some sort of madness. Even though the story of Taylor is different details, but I think you know what I'm saying. That a certain host drives a Yeerk to be a bit off, shall we say. But Visser 3 was the villain of the week sort of character. He had more of all these different stuff. And he did have his good moments. He did. And he had his charm. For as much as he was annoying and overused, he did have a charm. And I don't think there's many Animorphs fans out there who wouldn't like him. And yeah, he probably should be higher on this list, being the #1 villain. But yeah, the problems... Who's meowing at me now? What do you want, Tiggles? Do you want to come in? I've got all the cats coming in here now. What are you meowing at? Visser 3 may well be higher on some of your lists. Some of you might rank him even lower. But I think 8 for him is fair. He's better than a couple of the one-off sort of okay characters. But there are much better villains than him, I believe. So let's move on to number 7. Number 7 is sort of technically a one-off character, another one of those. It's Visser 4. Visser 4 appeared in one of my favourite books of the series, which was the 3rd Megamorphs, Elfangor's Secret. I like it so much that I almost forgot the name. Visser 4 was the one that found the time matrix and went back in time to like the Battle of Agincourt. Which university was it? But he went back in time and did all sorts of weird stuff, changing time. The Animorphs go back, and it's an absolute thrill ride of a story. The story of Visser 4 specifically was that he was in control of the Yeerk invasion of planet Lyra, which we saw unfold in book 18. We never met him personally, but we know that he was in charge of that, and because of the Lyra failure, he was demoted, and he went in search of this time matrix, found it, and did all the stuff that he did. Why is he ranked 7th? There's nothing really to dislike about him, and the story was brilliant, and I thought the whole John Berryman stuff was very good as well. I just thought he did some pretty awesome stuff. It was just a brilliant story. The reason he's not ranked higher, despite the fact that he was in a brilliant story and there's not much to dislike about him, is that largely it was what people did as a consequence of his actions that made him exciting. So it's not so much his character that made him brilliant, it was how everyone reacted to him. Which is why he's not ranked higher, and that he's basically a one-off character. But interesting, made a brilliant story, and generally fun. I'd have liked to see more of Visser 4 personally, but alas, not seen enough. So moving on, number 6. Number 6 is Father. Who remembers Father from this book here, The Elmist Chronicles? So Tumin has been on the ship since losing his planet, and they go onto this, what seems to be, I believe, a deserted place. It's got loads of water. They go under, they crash land, and Tumin is the only survivor, and this creature with all these like tentacles and stuff takes all of his friends and allies and uses them as puppets, and they sort of hover around him, and he infiltrates Tumin's head, plays this weird set of games with him, and it's a fascinating story. We don't get to learn too much about, where Father came from, what his purpose is, but there's a lot of mystery, and if you know me, I love mystery. And the way that Tumin eventually beats Father, so absorbs him into his own being, just like Father had done to him, was a brilliant bit to read. And also the whole thing where he's holding up these dead bodies of Tumin's allies was horrifying in a good way. It was, whoa, crikey, what's all that about? Yeah, just fantastic stuff. But again, a one-off villain, and I thought we saw as much as we needed to see. I thought any more than that and he would lose some of his mystery. I thought just the right amount of stuff, this Father being, this, was it the planet? I've got to reread that book to get more details, but I thought Father was fascinating, hence why number 6 on this list. Now we're going into the top 5. Who's at number 5? Number 5 is one of the chappies from Unit 0. Remember book 38, The Arrival, where 4 Andalites come down to Earth on a mission to kill Visser 3. But one of them is on a bit of a different mission, Arbat. His mission is to unleash a virus amongst the planet and do a freaking lot of damage to not only Visser 3 but pretty much everyone else. from what I remember. And it was a fantastic book, so much like with Visser 4 previous, yeah, Arbat's basically a one-off character, and a lot of the good stuff is what people do around him, but Arbat does more. We interact more with Arbat than we do Visser 4, and we see his betrayal when he shoots Aloth, I believe it was Aloth, that he betrayed and had killed. And we see his plan unfold, but we also understand why this plan is there. It's not just mustache twirling, cackling and all that. It's not. It's a very Andalite way of dealing with things. Basically, combine all your enemies and blow them up, regardless of who else might be there. So, very similar to Alaran. And Alaran almost made this list, by the way. I believe he was placed 11th. So Alaran, very similar situation. But Arbat, even though he appeared one time, I thought had a brilliant effect. We followed his character a lot more than we did someone say Visser 4, and I think he was a good example of if the Andalites as a race was summed up in one individual. You understand where he's coming from, and initially looks like the good guy, but then it turns out actually things are a bit different to what they may seem on the surface here. And I thought Arbat was fantastic. Unfortunately for him, he meets his gruesome end in that book as well. And unlike a lot of the other villains, I think that's a satisfying resolution to the character. You know, we actually see a resolution that, you know, isn't completely rushed. So yeah, excellent stuff. Arbat is number 5 on my list. Number 4, another one of the more prominent characters, Visser 1 or Idris 562. / Eva's controller, Eva's Yerk, Marco's mother. Not seen as often as Visser 3, which actually works in her favour. Also a bit more complex in terms of character, mostly from the book Visser, but also in the main series, whenever Visser 1 appears, there's a lot more competence about her, a lot more coolness, a bit more subtle, a bit more covert, and that's what immediately pushes her above Visser 3 in this ranking. I could have put her higher up. I could have put her first, second. But there's one problem. So, her character is brilliant, especially in Visser. We get all this nuance, all this good stuff. But then what happens? At the end of Visser, she gets sent off to the Inati homeworld with an ultimatum, basically. What's the next we see of her? She basically gets killed. And that's that. I mean, largely I would blame book 45 for that, which was a pretty shocking book. But this character that you've built up with such intrigue, she narrated her own book and did all this cool stuff, to just basically offer like that, without any sort of meaning behind it, completely rushed and completely underwhelming, really reduces her character, and it's such a shame. If they'd have done better with her plot, her arc, because it was like building up to something brilliant, and then it's just like, actually no, screw that, she's dead now. It was Game of Thrones-esque, basically, and not the good Game of Thrones. Because I'd understand it if she was just suddenly wiped out, if it was done well, like if it was meaningful, if it was good, if it meant something, if it made logical... I mean, it makes logical sense, but it was just a bad way to go. It just was. Basically, they just offed her character. After all this build-up, it's just like, nah, done with that. And her death has very little consequence. Oh, Visser 3 is now Visser 1. He's changed his rank. Does that do much? I mean, you could say that because of that, he turned it more into an open war. I still just think her character deserved a much better ending, because it was just like... So, thinking of it now, I understand that there was an effect of her being killed, but god damn, it was weak. So, like, she was like just another slug. That was it. After all this build up, after that book we got of her, yeah, if she had what would have been in my opinion a better ending, like a better resolution and end to her character arc rather than just sweeping her off, she probably would have been higher on the list. But regardless, we're now getting into top 3 territory. Who's number 3? Number 3 is the one I've got on my screen back here. Garroth 168. Another one-off villain. So why is this villain so high on the list? because he's the first time we come across a Yeerk, with the slight exception of Idris, who is just satisfactory in all ways. You see him once, but he's evil, yes. He's intimidating. He's very powerful. But he's competent, or largely competent, we assume. He's well-spoken. He's clever. He's subtle. This guy needed to be seen more often. But he wasn't, alas, which is why he's only 3 on the list. But if it weren't for the fact that he was hardly ever seen, he ticks all the right boxes for me, for what I want to see in a villain. Every single box is ticked, except how much he's used. It's just like there, and then he's not there anymore. He doesn't do anything really after Visser. You know, we never hear of him. We never see the effect of his actions necessarily. We never see how he reacts to Visser or Idris failing on the Inati homeworld. Yeah, he's just never seen again. It's as if he's not even there, which is a ruddy shame. And I do love the character so much that I do hope someday to do a fanfic on him, Garroth, which I look forward to doing, but I've got other fanfics to write before that. Yeah, excellent villain, just wish he'd have been used more. Not as much as Visser 3, of course, maybe as much as Visser 1 sort of level. Anyway, who's going to be the top 2? Have a think about it for 3, 2, 1. I'm going to get into it now. At number 2, maybe a surprise. My number 2 villain is the Drode. Why, Adam, you ask? Well, I'd have thought, because you've got Cryak, haven't you? But the thing about Cryak is, he doesn't really do anything. First of all, in the Elmis Chronicles, he just appears out of nowhere as a foil for Elmis. We don't really get any story with him. He's just this evil being. And then when it comes into the main series, yeah, we see him a couple of times and he's sort of there. But mostly, the Drode is Cryak's rather entertaining proxy. And he's the one with all the character. And he basically tells all the Animorphs, Lila, please, what are you doing? Get off the massage chair. Go over there. Drode is basically Cryak's character. He has all the snickering, mustache twirling, but he does it in a sort of ironic way as well. He's also quite clever. Just in the way he talks, you can tell, you know, he's got a bit of stuff going on in there. He's almost cartoonish, but in a very sinister way, which I like as well. He appears more often than Cryak, for a start. Yeah, he just has he's Cryak's personality, basically. Cryak is just sort of this thing that's there. This evil being that everyone fears. He just sort of stands there in the background. The Drode is the real frickin' bad guy. Well, the real character here. I love the Drode. He's just entertaining. And he has some of the best lines as well, I think. Well, you better not mess with the keyboard. Not only that, but I think his design is great as well, frankly. So, yeah, ticks most of the boxes. And there's not many villains in this series that does that. He's just thoroughly entertaining, basically. And he appears often enough that, you know, he's certainly going to stick around in the memory. Which means, unfortunately, for Cryak, he doesn't appear on this list. Just didn't have enough character. Just didn't have enough. So who is my number 1 villain? You probably already have guessed by this point. It's David, my number 1 villain of the series. Why? Well, he's fascinating. He's a truly tragic figure, and I think there's a lot of debate amongst Animorphs fans on. I mean, I've done the video. Was he always destined to be evil? And I thought it was a fascinating thing to look into, and I hope you found the video itself fascinating. But yeah, there's a lot to David that is mysterious, especially when you bring in Alternamorphs 2, which I personally now consider part of my headcanon, because it adds so much depth to this character. Because his turn to the dark side seems very abrupt and very not deserved in a way. But if you take into account Alternamorphs 2, then it makes sense. And I love that. And then, of course, the sort of return in book 48, where I don't think he actually returned. I think it was an illusion created by Kryak. He is basically a mirror for Rachel as well. He is fascinating, intelligent, ruthless, evil, but also tragic. His dark side could have been avoided, sort of. Yeah, go watch my David video. I'll probably link it at the end of this one. Adds a whole lot of mystery to the series, which is a big one for me. I like that sort of stuff. And is also a brilliant vehicle for the other characters, because not only was he himself a fully fleshed out and well-written character, in my opinion, his effect was massive on our main characters. It wasn't like they just got rid of him and they just carried on as normal without much difference to themselves. But he changed their characters too. He had such a massive effect on them. And he wasn't overused, like Visser 3. He wasn't underused. I think he was used just the right amount. And it just brings about a lot of discussion. And that's what this channel is all about. That's what I enjoy. And I hope you enjoy his character too. Whether you think he's inherently evil, or whether you think he was a monster of the Animorphs' own creation, or something else. Maybe he was a creation of Kryak, or even the Elemist. Go watch that David Annie Theory video. I'll link it at the end of this one. I will make sure I do. Anyway, that's my list, my top 10 Animorphs villains list. Just missing out on the list were characters like Alaran, Tom, Kryak. I think those were the three that came closest to ending up on this list. If I were to do a top 10 worst, the one at the bottom would be Taylor. And then there'd be something like the Valik or Gafinilan. Yeah, that would probably be the bottom three. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. What are your thoughts? Remember to like and subscribe and do all that fun stuff to help me out. I hope this video has given you help in, you know, having some fun thoughts. So, enough rambling from me, enough scratching at things from the cat, Mercia, and I shall see you next time. Oh, what's my outro again? From somewhere in the Animorphs universe. Ta-ra!